South Africa is in the throes of a labor crisis. The deadly Marikana shootings last year may have been symptoms of much deeper problems in the country's labor sector. Well, on Talk Africa today, CCTV's Renee Delcam joins us from Johannesburg with an update on the unfolding story. And also joining us on the line from Johannesburg for more insight is Mr. Patrick Craven, the COSATU spokesperson. But just how bad is the situation at the moment? Let's take a look.
From sector to sector and militant in tone.
Economy in South Africa, it's an economy because there are workers in this country who produce the goods.
This year's strikes are becoming long and costly. Deep-set resentment about income inequality, fueled by sometimes vicious union rivalry.
People who plan to kill people. We have cowards, we have sick people in our society. And
that last year reached boiling point. Police shootings at Marikana were part of the story, though not the start. Unions say the tensions go back more than a century.
The mining industry, I think, does epitomize the problems. It was an industry built on ruthless exploitation of mainly migrant workers who came from far away, who worked in incredibly difficult and dangerous conditions with a huge loss of life over the years, extremely low paid and treated extremely badly.
In post-apartheid South Africa, initially an abundance of goodwill, now being used up, say analysts, as workers lose patience.
The public sector was really an extension of the ANC. There was commitment, there was loyalty, one was enamored with the public sector, average public sector employee was enamored with their newfound political freedom and enfranchisement, and rightly so. And I think, though, that there was an increasing disenchantment with the fact that service delivery was not as quick as some had hoped.
At its heart, two ideological viewpoints once aligned, that of African nationalism, more comfortable with the idea of a capitalist class.
A strong, united federation, a strong national union that operate and unite all workers.
And those further left, whose struggle is with capitalism itself. A tension that's always simmered, but that now may be beginning to surface. So there may be this new norm in labour relations in South Africa, but it's a story that goes back many decades and may have many years ahead of it. The irony of it all, of course, is that in this perennial battle, the workers themselves very rarely benefit. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Carltonville, South Africa.
All right, CCTV's Renee Delcam has been following the developments for us down in South Africa. She joins us now. Renee, how would you describe the magnitude of the labor crisis in South Africa at the moment?
Well, you'll remember last year during South Africa's strikes, we saw a very serious situation arise where there was not only the loss of productivity, but also the loss of life. So once again, people are quite nervous, very concerned about the current labor crisis. Of course, what appears to be the situation at the moment is that there are a number of sectors that have been affected, and this is potentially crippling for South Africa's industry and will have a great negative effect on the economy as a whole.
Renee, the strikes have spread across the various sectors, though, but which sectors would you say is the hardest hit?
Well, as we said, a number of sectors affected, but right now it appears to be the mining sector, once again, particularly hard hit. We have 80,000 gold miners currently on strike, something that the South African economy can simply not afford, that mine bosses are saying are likely to lead to the shutting down of mines if there is a protracted strike. We also see the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, which is affecting the car manufacturing industry. About 30,000 workers out on strike for the past 2 weeks right now. So the country once again losing tens of millions of rands every day in lost productivity.
the National Union of Mine Workers and the other union, though, they're asking for between 60 and 150%. And they offered the workers like 6%, which was rejected, though. Is there a coordinated approach, though, to this whole strike situation? Or, I mean, the management and the labor union seem to be miles apart on this situation.
Yes, and this has prompted President Jacob Zuma to plead with both sides, with all involved, to try and resolve the situation as soon as possible. You know, workers are saying that the bosses are arrogant, and the mine bosses are saying, if we have a protracted strike, we are going to have to shut down the mines, which will lead to great joblessness and further poverty. So the situation at the moment, most sides still trying to find one another, but the president has been pleading that they try and do this as soon as possible. So hopefully those pleas will make a difference in the negotiations.
What impact, though, is this having on the economy at the moment, Renee?
We might see more job losses at the end of the day. We will see more poverty, as I said. And once again, all people in the mining sector and the economic sector are saying this is going to be crippling if it isn't sorted out as soon as possible. And also, we've seen the mine workers standing their ground, so very difficult to say when it's going to end, but certainly it will have a great effect on investor confidence and a great crippling effect on the economy.
All right, CCTV's Renee Delcam joining us there from Johannesburg. Thank you. Well, thousands of miners in the gold sector abstained from work this week, joining other workers across other sectors in South Africa. Mining operations across South Africa have stalled as the unions stick to their demand for higher wages. Well, joining me now on the line from Johannesburg is Mr. Patrick Craven, the national spokesperson of the largest South Africa's trade union, COSATU. Mr. Craven, thank you very much. Now, give us a quick rundown of what is going on there, though, because the strikes continue to spread across the sectors. As a representative of the largest of South Africa's trade unions, what would you say is the problem with South Africa's labor industry today?
The problems are rooted in South Africa's history. Up until 1994, workers had virtually no rights. We lived in a ruthless, racist dictatorship in which workers were exploited by employers, particularly in the mines and on the farms. It's been generally recognized that on the economic front, things haven't changed much since the days of apartheid. South Africa is now the most unequal society in the whole world, and that inevitably has an effect on workers who feel that they are not getting a reward for the contribution they make to the wealth of the country. Despite the slowdown in the world market, which has had a negative effect, it's still a very profitable industry, and yet workers are paid nothing remotely like the sort of money that their top employers get.
The unions are asking for a wage increase from between 60% to about 150%. An offer was made for about 6%, which the workers rejected. There seems to be a disconnect here between labor and management. Where is the disconnect? What is a viable solution here?
There's nothing unusual about claims being well in excess of the initial offer that employers make. This is the nature of bargaining. One of the reasons why the amount seems so high is that in many of the disputes, the main demand is for a big increase in money for the lowest paid. And it's not being put in terms of percentages, but in terms of actual amounts. And because one of the problems we've had over recent periods is that percentage increases, far from reducing inequality, actually increase it. Because obviously people at the top, who get the same percentage increase as people at the bottom, get far more actual money in return. And so there is a move now towards saying the people at the very bottom should get increases up to a minimum level. And so when you work that out as a percentage, it sounds like a lot. But when you look at the actual amounts, it isn't. And I've just done a quick calculation that the top chief executive of Goldfields, which is one of the big mining companies,
earned last year more than 400 times as much, not as the workers are getting now, but as they're actually demanding. The workers aren't just demanding higher wages. They want to see a complete transformation of the entire industry. The mining industry traditionally has been run by foreign-owned companies who simply extract the wealth from the country through the exploitation of workers, export it, and bring no real benefit to the South African economy.
All right, Mr. Patrick Craven, a spokesperson for COSATU, joining us on the line from Johannesburg. Thank you for your insights. We'll take a short break and return in a moment.
Economy in South Africa, it's an economy because there are workers in this country who produce the goods.
I don't see the purpose in strikes. What for? What do we achieve? What do we achieve? You strike and you strike and you strike, but nothing gets done at the end of the day.
I think the government should be doing a little bit more to show appreciation to the workers and stuff, because they're working in harsh conditions and then they're not getting enough pay.
My life is getting expensive. We are looking for jobs, trying to make our lives better, trying to do the right thing.
Culture Express. See the world in color.
Make major investments in China.
In China, why we are living for.
That's a fundamental government.
Position on China's
by leaders.
I think that's the first step. Have a dialogue, political change and human rights. Don't you think human rights?
Dialogue. Ideas matter.
So what are the underlying issues in the South African labour standoff, and how is this impacting the economy and investor confidence? To analyse this, we're joined by Ibrahim Fakir, a former senior researcher at the Centre for Policy Studies in South Africa. Mr. Fakir is also a frequent commentator on politics, governance, democracy and development. In studio with me is Mr. Vincent Kimosop, the Executive Director, International Institute for Legislative Affairs. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
But before we begin discussions, Sumitra Naidu has more on how the strikes have affected the economy.
There's still no movement in the automotive sector since operations ground to a halt 3 weeks ago. The strike has cost the economy an estimated $600 million to date. Construction in most parts has also stalled. South African Airways workers started their strike 2 weeks ago and are refusing to back down until they get higher wages.
We are not settling for anything less than 12% because we believe the company can afford it after the profit that we've managed to get for the company with all the work and the sweat that we've been giving to the company.
Wage negotiations have failed thus far. The unions insist they are being shortchanged.
Unions and perhaps the people whom they are representing are feeling marginalized, and not just that, they're feeling that their incomes just aren't going very far.
Workers say all they're asking for is a living wage.
I am dressed in a t-shirt, my hair is not combed, my lips, I had to borrow by one of my friends' lip gloss because he can't even pay me a decent salary, and that's all we're asking for.
Can't pay our bills anymore.
The ANC-led government has done little to quell the protests, even though the work stoppages spell disaster for the economy.
Makes it a very, very difficult exercise for them to try and wield the big stick to try and flex their muscles and say, guys, you must tone down your expectations, you must tone down your wage demands, because it just means that it could well lose them votes at the next election.
Last year's strike action in the mining industry cost the economy 15 billion rand in lost output. The latest wave of strike action will no doubt further erode the country's balance sheet and could lead to more job losses. But strikers say all they want is a better life. Sumitra Nadu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
All right, South Africa is in the throes of a labour crisis. First, Ibrahim Fakir in Johannesburg. South African workers have been continuing with their strike action throughout the week. It's been ongoing now for several months. Why has the strike action continued for months? What exactly is going on?
There's no doubt that labour unrest and certainly problems within the labour movement generally, specifically within the Congress of South African Trade Unions, which is an alliance partner of the governing African National Congress, they've been having serious ructions, not just amongst members, not just in industrial and labour relations, but also politically within the alliance partner within the Congress of South African Trade Unions, simply because their Secretary General is now up for charges. And he has been a frequent critic, even though they're part of the alliance of President Jacob Zuma and the ANC. But, you know, the economic reality is that workers are asking for an increase in wages, particularly with reference to this specific strike, because their argument is that managers and executives within the mining companies are obviously getting very large salaries, and in addition to that, very large bonuses. And I think what this is largely symptomatic of the very huge and gaping inequality chasm which exists in South African society.
All right. I think the unions have been asking for something between 60% and 150%, but, you know, the workers were offered something like 6%, which they rejected. There is clearly here a disconnect, though, between what the labourers want, what labour wants, and what the employers want.
Well, I think at the early stage of negotiations, there obviously would be, because both parties would begin to take very polarized positions so that they eventually, after some time, meet in the middle. The reality is that a revised offer has been put on the table, and the National Union of Mine Workers, which represents about 90,000 workers, about a workforce of about 150,000 in the gold mining sector, is now going to take this back to their strike committee and see whether that offer is in fact a realistic one.
All right. Vincent, though, the labour unrest, as Ibrahim calls it, the labour unrest has been affecting like the automobile, the air transport, the technology stations, construction sites. How are you reading the crisis ongoing in South Africa?
I think I'd agree to what he has pointed out. The core issue is economic. You're looking at inflation, high cost of living, and the reality is that what the workers are pointing out is that the top executives, compared to what they are earning, living in the same environment, they're saying that no, we cannot stand this, and the only thing that they have to deploy is actually their labor, that we are going to withdraw our services. Now, that is within the economic front as far as the dispute is concerned. Added to the fact that we also have the politics within the labor movement, we have two factions. NAM and SCMA, the one that they are all looking for members, and one way that they can compete and get more members on board is by promising higher wage salaries. When the current crisis or the strike started, they were asking for 60%. Ordinarily, of course, looking at the laborer, 60% pay raise is very lucrative. But the undertones, the things that they're looking for is membership, power, and control. But all this will spill to the political environment. 10% contribution to an economy of a country is of course of a high significance. If you look at the history of the labor movement in South Africa, they've always allied themselves with the ANC. So ordinarily, every politician would want to have control and a stake in the process. And when you look at the people who've been in the labor movement, they've also risen to get political power. So looking at all this, it's a matrix that is interconnected and has both economic implications, political implications within the South African economy. And if it's not arrested, one of the labor who was interviewed was saying, we are working very hard within this economy. It is white dominated, but even the benefits of the fight that we had against apartheid, we are not realizing. And 17 years down the line since the end of minority rule, it is the economic dividends out of that that would actually be reflected in whether people are benefiting or are not. And that is one of the things that is in question as far as this strike is concerned.
All right. Ibrahim, though, some of the unions have called what has been offered to the workers as slave wages there. What has happened to the Black Empowerment program?
Well, there's no doubt that the Black Empowerment Program complicates the negotiation strategies used by mining companies, particularly and especially the owners of big capital, because to the extent that Black economic empowerment has been successful, what you found is that politically connected individuals who happen to be black are sitting on the boards of many of these companies, in some cases own a majority shareholding in companies, and so therefore conflicted. Conflicted simply because the core constituency which is asking for this delivery is from the constituency from amongst which they have been previously drawn. But at the moment, there's a deeper conflict going on. So you've got these conflicts and ethical interests, or ethical conflicts at least, which are beginning to emerge. So Black economic empowerment, to the extent that it's been successful, has also spawned a whole range of different conflicts in the society. That's the first point to make. The second is that Black economic empowerment, if you really think about it, has been terribly successful in equity ownership and equity transfer. There hasn't been as much success at the operational level. And the question to ask is that if there were substantial economic transformation at the operational, the managerial and the technical level, would you have the same kind of conflicts, at least ethically and economically, beginning to arise in the current context? Or would you be able to find an easier negotiation path between this?
All right, Vincent, but that's the question, though, then, that 20 years after the end of apartheid, there's still that huge disparities between, you know, the black workers.
What has actually happened is a transfer of ownership previously from those who are the whites who are controlling the economy to a few select elites within the black community. Now, the challenge you have is that we were fighting for this at one point. Now, you are on the other side who has gotten this courtesy of the Black Empowerment, which is a politically instigated program, but the primary constituency, which is the black people, are not benefiting from this. Now, the other thing that we also have a conflict, and it's good to point out, is that the Black Empowerment Program should not only end in transfer of assets from a few select whites to a few black elitists. Everybody needs to benefit in the program. Now, the challenge is we need to see other African, most of the black people who are saying, this is our country. We need to enjoy the fruits. In Kenya, we call it the fruits of independence. And that happens by the share of the cake that you actually get it on the table. Now, let's look at it. The NAM is allied to COSATU. COSATU is a member of also the ANC. Now, the majority of the voters are actually the blacks who are poor and who are agitating and who are saying we want 60% so that we can actually see and feel the dividends of what we're working on. So what you would want to see in this process is that the government to actually see this as a bigger problem within the economy. Because
let's go back, though, to that whole issue that you're mentioning about why the black community is not benefiting from, as you call it, you know, the fruits of the independence. Because South Africa is Africa's largest economy. I mean, it anchors the BRICS in Africa. It's gold and platinum producing aspects are quite huge. Why isn't the black population, though, benefiting from the fruits of South Africa's independence? Is it about skills here? Is it about what is the issue?
The core issue, they usually say that the rich are more organized than the poor in any society when you look at it. So coupled with the skills deficiency, that is another issue, because opportunities exist, yes, within the South African economy, but you notice one thing, that they have not taken advantage in terms of building their capacity, taking up management position, organizing themselves, and even forming companies that they themselves can actually carry out and do this mining. Because ordinarily what has shifted is we have had a change, of course, within the political front, having more leaders, having more black representation at the political level. When people feel that we have a stake in this economy, what happens? They confidently can contribute easily to dispute resolution processes, because they feel we are part and parcel of this process. So for me, a long-term solution.
I'm going to jump in there, Vincent, because I want to put that question there to Ibrahim. Now, Zimbabwe is pursuing an indigenization program there, and President Jacob Zuma has at some stage talked about nationalization. Is nationalization a concept that can take root in South Africa?
Well, there's no doubt that the question of nationalization has been on the public agenda and has been debated several times, and is continuously debated. Make no doubt, make no mistake about that. But at the 2012 Congress of the African National Congress, the governing party, and at its policy resolution conference, I think it was quite squarely taken, a decision was taken that there would be no nationalization wholesale on the one hand. On the other hand, of course, there were alternative policy proposals put on the table, that is looking at windfall taxes, looking at the question of higher taxation, looking at different share and equity ownership schemes. So those are the methods which are going to be used, simply because you do have a property clause in South Africa's constitution, and there is widespread and generalized acceptance of the constitution. Now, you might have populist radicals, or people who pretend to be populist radicals, who might say nationalization is the answer. The reality is that nationalization is not that quite simply the answer, simply because it requires very serious technical, occupational, managerial and executive skills. And if you look at the way in which the state currently functions, it is impossible to say that many of those skills firstly reside in the state, and secondly that the state is going to be effectively able to deploy those kind of skills where they're required. That's the first point to make. The second point to make is quite simply that if the state is currently failing in administering, executing and managing itself, why would it be able to execute the complex logistical supply chain and other requirements which are required in actually managing and running the mines, or at least other complex areas of the economy? So I think that debate has squarely been put down on the table. But there are very complicated factors for why we haven't seen the kind of redistribution which may have been necessary. And I think this is a moment in time which all South Africans across the board are going to have to take more seriously. And it's not quite simply a racial question. Of course, race matters, simply because 80% of the population, there's a coincidence between the identity and the inequality. But the reality is that it's not simply a racial question. It is also a class question, if you want to think about economic relations in class terms.
All right, Ibrahim Fakir, we'll leave it there for the moment. Ibrahim Fakir, a former senior researcher at the Center for Policy Studies in South Africa. Mr. Fakir is a frequent commentator on politics, governance, democracy and development. Also, Mr. Vincent Kimosop, the Executive Director of the International Institute for Legislative Affairs. Thank you very much for being on Talk Africa today. We'll leave it there for the moment. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Bye-bye for now.